Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to share a powerful truth with you, a truth that might challenge the way you view solitude. You see, in a world that constantly tells you to be surrounded, to be connected, to be busy, God has something different in mind. There is a divine purpose in being alone. Let's begin by understanding the power of purpose. You were created by God with a unique purpose. Your life is not an accident. But how can you discover that purpose if you're always distracted by the noise and demands of others? The first thing that God did with Adam after creating him was to place him in a garden alone. Why? Because it was in his solitude that he could discover his true identity and his connection to God. It was in that quiet place that God gave him the vision to steward the earth. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but I don't want to be alone. It's lonely. But let me tell you, loneliness is not the same as solitude. Loneliness is a state of emotional void. Solitude is a state of spiritual connection. When God wants you to be alone, it's because he's calling you into a deeper relationship with him. He wants you to hear his voice more clearly. He wants you to be transformed from the inside out, without the distractions of the world. Look at the life of Jesus. Even though he was always surrounded by people, he often withdrew to a solitary place to pray, to reflect, to hear from his Father. If Jesus needed time alone, how much more do we need it? It is in those moments of solitude that you discover who you really are, your true essence, your mission, your destiny. Solitude has a profound way of revealing the deeper layers of our lives, especially when it comes to understanding our purpose. In today's fast-paced world, many of us are constantly surrounded by noise, by people, by tasks, and by distractions. It's easy to lose sight of who we are and why we're here. But when God calls you into solitude, he is inviting you to step away from the chaos and begin a journey of self-discovery. In those moments of being alone, you have the opportunity to hear God's voice more clearly, to understand his purpose for your life, and to align yourself with the plans he has set before you. When we look at the creation story in the Bible, we see a powerful example of how God used solitude to reveal purpose. After God created Adam, he placed him in the Garden of Eden, not just for companionship, but for a deeper purpose. Adam was alone in the garden, and in that solitude, God gave him the responsibility of naming the animals and tending to the land. It wasn't until Adam was in that alone place that God revealed his purpose and identity as the caretaker of the earth. God didn't need to create a group of people for Adam to fulfill his purpose. All he needed was to be alone with God, to hear from him, and to receive direction. This is a powerful lesson for us. God often speaks to us when we're alone, because it's in solitude that he can fully reveal the next step in our journey. When we're constantly surrounded by people or distractions, it's hard to hear God's voice. There's too much noise, too many opinions, and too many things pulling our attention. But in the stillness, when we step away from everything, God can speak directly into our hearts. It's in that sacred space that we begin to see ourselves more clearly, not as the world defines us, but as God sees us. He shows us our true identity, our unique purpose, and the reason we were created. Think about it. How can you discover your true purpose if you're always in a crowd, always seeking validation from others, always being influenced by the world's standards? Purpose is a deeply personal matter. It's between you and your Creator. It's in the quiet moments when you're alone with God that he reveals the deeper parts of you. It's in solitude that you can truly focus on what God has called you to do without the distractions that the world brings. You begin to understand your gifts, talents, and passions in a way that goes beyond just what's expected of you. When we take time to be alone, we are not just distancing ourselves from people, we are stepping into a divine appointment. The quiet space is where we allow God to mold us and prepare us for the purpose he's designed for us. If you're always in the crowd, you may never understand your true calling. You might find yourself chasing after the wrong things, trying to keep up with everyone else, and seeking validation from sources that don't align with your purpose. But when you embrace solitude, you give God the opportunity to speak clearly, to reveal his plans, and to align your life with the vision he has for you. Solitude also gives you time to reflect on where you've been and where you're going. It provides clarity on your life's direction, and it allows you to assess the decisions you've made and how they align with God's will. The more you sit in God's presence, the more you begin to understand the bigger picture. You start to see how your experiences, your gifts, and your passions all work together to fulfill a purpose that's uniquely yours. No one else can walk the path that God has designed for you because it's your journey. And solitude is the place where you receive the instructions for that journey. In this process of solitude, we are transformed. We are shaped by God's hand, refined in His presence, and prepared for the work He's calling us to do. It's in these moments that our vision becomes clearer, our priorities shift, and our hearts begin to align with the will of God. Solitude doesn't just reveal purpose, it also prepares us for it. It's in that alone time that God can deal with the things that might be holding us back, insecurities, doubts, fears, and distractions, and help us to emerge stronger, more focused, and more confident in the calling He's placed on our lives. So the next time you find yourself alone, don't see it as a time of emptiness or isolation. See it as an opportunity, a divine invitation to discover who you really are and to hear from the one who created you. In solitude, God reveals your purpose, and He does so in a way that no crowd or distraction ever could. Step into that quiet space and let God speak. Many people often confuse the idea of being alone with the feeling of loneliness. The world we live in today is filled with constant noise, connectivity, and interaction. We are always surrounded by people, always on our phones, and our phones with touch with others. But even with all this connection, many individuals still experience deep feelings of loneliness. The truth is, loneliness is an emotional condition. It's an empty, disconnected feeling that arises when we don't feel valued, understood, or accepted. Solitude, however, is a different matter. It is a state of being alone without feeling lonely. And it's in solitude that we can truly grow and connect with God. When God calls you into solitude, He isn't pushing you into isolation to make you feel abandoned or rejected. Instead, He's creating a space for you to connect with Him and with yourself on a deeper level. It's in solitude that you begin to understand who you truly are, outside of the expectations of others, outside of the noise, and outside of the distractions. Solitude is where God can work on your heart, your mind, and your spirit, free from external pressures. The truth is, some of the greatest transformations in our lives happen when we are alone, because it's in those quiet moments that God can reveal the deepest parts of who we are and what He's called us to do. Many times we confuse solitude with isolation, thinking that being alone automatically means we are lost, abandoned, or unimportant. But in reality, solitude is a gift of space where God's presence can be fully realized. In solitude, you're not disconnected from the world, but rather you're disconnecting from distractions that prevent you from hearing God's voice. The quiet moments are the times when God can speak to you without interruption. The stillness allows you to tune into the divine, to the inner whispers of the Holy Spirit, and to gain clarity and understanding about your life's purpose. It's not about pushing people away, but about creating a space for God to speak into your life in ways that are often drowned out by the busyness of everyday living. Jesus, the Son of God, often withdrew from the crowds to spend time alone. He would retreat to the mountains, to a quiet place to pray and reflect. Jesus knew that in order to fulfill His purpose, He needed time away from the crowds, away from the demands of others, to connect with His Father. If Jesus, the Son of God, needed solitude to hear from the Father, how much more do we need it? Solitude was not a sign of rejection or disconnection for Jesus. It was a time of intimate connection and divine guidance. In those moments alone, He received strength, vision, and direction for the mission that lay ahead. When we experience solitude, we may initially feel uncomfortable. We may be tempted to fill the silence with distractions or to seek the company of others because we fear feeling lonely. But what we fail to realize is that it's in those uncomfortable moments of solitude that God can do His most profound work in us. We might start to reflect on our lives, our choices, and our relationship with God in ways we never would in the midst of the noise. It's in solitude that we can face our fears, confront our insecurities, and discover the deeper desires of our hearts. God doesn't want you to stay stuck in loneliness. Instead, He wants to help you move from a place of isolation to a place of healing, strength, and growth. Solitude provides the space to address those internal battles, to come face to face with your emotions, and to grow stronger in your understanding of who God is and who you are in Him. Loneliness is often the result of unmet emotional needs, And in those moments, we may turn to others, to material things, or to distractions in search of fulfillment. But these external sources can never fill the void of loneliness in our hearts. Only God can truly satisfy that longing for connection. Solitude provides us with the opportunity to deepen our relationship with God, to experience His love and peace in ways that fill us up and prepare us to face the world again. It's not a time to withdraw from the world entirely, but a time to restore and renew ourselves so that we can engage with the world more fully and authentically. When we allow God to fill us during our times of solitude, we no longer feel the weight of loneliness because we are reminded that He is always with us, always present, always loving us. Solitude doesn't have to be feared. It's not something to dread or avoid. It's a necessary part of the journey of self-discovery and spiritual growth. When we embrace it, we allow God to heal our hearts, restore our souls, and fill us with His presence. And when we emerge from solitude, we are not the same. We are renewed, strengthened, and more aligned with God's purpose for our lives. So when God calls you into a season of solitude, remember that He is not abandoning you. He is drawing you closer to Himself. He is inviting you to experience the fullness of His love and to be equipped for the calling He has placed on your life. Embrace solitude not as a place of isolation, but as a sacred space where God meets you, speaks to you, and transforms you. In solitude, you find connection not just with God, but with the deepest parts of your own heart. Jesus' life was a profound example of how important it is to step away from the crowds and find solitude. Even though He was surrounded by people wherever He went, disciples, followers, crowds seeking healing, and those longing for His wisdom, He consistently took time to withdraw from them. The Bible records numerous instances where Jesus would leave the bustling world behind and retreat to a quiet place to pray, reflect, and reconnect with His Father. Why did He do this? Why, when His ministry was so important and His time with people was so precious, did He prioritize solitude? The answer lies in His understanding of the vital need to connect with God in order to fulfill His mission. Jesus' withdrawal from the crowds was never a sign of avoidance. It wasn't that He didn't love the people or wasn't concerned about their needs, quite the opposite. His heart was full of compassion for them. But He knew that in order to fulfill His purpose on earth, He needed to be fully aligned with the will of His Father. He understood that His mission wasn't just about the immediate needs of those around Him. It was about fulfilling a divine purpose that could only be completed through intimate connection with God. This is why He regularly withdrew to spend time alone in prayer. It was during these quiet moments that He received the strength, wisdom, and guidance to carry out His work. In Mark 1:35, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where He prayed. Here we see that Jesus intentionally chose solitude to begin His day. He knew that without this personal time with God, He would lose His sense of direction and clarity. His mission required constant connection with the Father. Jesus' example shows us that solitude is not only beneficial, but essential for anyone seeking to do the will of God. Jesus didn't only seek solitude in the early morning hours. In fact, throughout His ministry, He withdrew from the crowds at various points to spend time alone. In Luke 5:16, it tells us, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Jesus made it a priority to take time away from the pressing demands of ministry, to be still, to reflect, and to hear from God. He modeled the importance of personal connection with the Father, showing us that our effectiveness in life and purpose depends on this deep communion with God. If Jesus, the Son of God, needed to withdraw from the crowds, how much more do we need solitude to be able to fulfill the purposes God has for us? When Jesus withdrew, He didn't just do it out of habit or for the sake of personal comfort. He withdrew because it was in those moments of solitude that He could receive the strength to face the trials ahead. It was in those quiet moments that He could recharge spiritually and gain clarity. Ministry, leadership, and fulfilling a purpose all come with challenges. There are obstacles, doubts, and demands that can drain us. But it is in solitude that we are refueled and renewed. Jesus understood this, and that's why he made solitude a non-negotiable part of his life. Jesus' retreats to solitary places also provided him with the opportunity to listen for the voice of the Father. Throughout his life, he continually sought to do the will of God, not his own will. This constant alignment with the Father was only possible through focused, uninterrupted time with him. In Matthew 14:23, after feeding the 5,000, Jesus went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. This moment of solitude came after a powerful miracle, a moment of great success in his ministry. Yet even in times of success, Jesus knew that the most important thing was his relationship with God. He didn't let the excitement or the demands of ministry distract him from what was most important. Solitude is also where Jesus found clarity about his next steps. In the midst of a busy ministry life where people constantly sought him out for healing and guidance, Jesus never acted impulsively. He knew when to stay and minister, and he knew when to withdraw for prayer and preparation. His time in solitude helped him discern the Father's will for his life, making his actions intentional and purposeful. Jesus didn't rush. He didn't allow the pressures around him to force him into decisions. Instead, he took time to listen, to pray, and to be guided by God's voice. One of the most powerful moments of solitude in Jesus' life occurred in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before his arrest. In his greatest moment of anguish, when he faced the weight of the world's sin on his shoulders, Jesus went to a quiet place to pray. He withdrew from his disciples and poured out his heart to the Father, asking if there was any other way to accomplish his mission. But even in that moment of intense struggle, he ultimately surrendered to God's will. Not my will, but yours be done, he prayed, Luke 22:42. Jesus' example teaches us that even in our deepest struggles, we must retreat to God in solitude, trusting that his plan is greater than our own. Jesus' life is a powerful reminder of the importance of solitude for spiritual strength, clarity, and alignment with God's purpose. If we want to fulfill the calling God has placed on our lives, we must follow his example of withdrawing from the noise and seeking God in the quiet places. It's not about escaping from the world. It's about refocusing our hearts and minds on what truly matters. Just as Jesus withdrew from the crowds to stay connected with the Father, we must also create space in our lives to hear from God and receive the strength we need to carry out his will. Embrace solitude, for it is in those quiet moments that we find the power to fulfill our purpose. Solitude is not just a time to step away from the world, but a sacred opportunity for transformation. It's in those moments of quiet reflection, when the noise of everyday life is silenced, that we can truly begin to change. We often think of transformation as a process that happens through external events, through relationships, achievements, or even struggles. But in reality, true transformation begins in solitude. It's when we're alone with nothing but our thoughts and our connection to God that we allow ourselves to be shaped and molded into who we were always meant to be. When we are constantly surrounded by people, distractions, and demands, it can be difficult to hear God's voice, to understand what he's calling us to do, and to reflect on where we're going in life. We often live on autopilot, reacting to the world around us, instead of intentionally choosing the direction we want to go. But solitude provides the space for deep self-examination. It's in those moments of stillness that we are able to pause, look inward, and reflect on our thoughts, actions, and heart posture. Solitude allows us to confront areas of our lives that need healing and growth, areas that may go unnoticed in the hustle and bustle of daily life. This process of transformation is often uncomfortable. When we're alone, we face the truth about ourselves, the parts of us that need healing, the habits that need to be broken, and the desires that need to be realigned with God's purpose. It's easy to avoid these truths when we're constantly surrounded by distractions, but solitude brings us face to face with them. And though this confrontation may feel difficult, it is in these moments that God begins to work in us. He brings healing, clarity, and understanding to those places of brokenness and uncertainty, helping us become the people he has created us to be. One of the most powerful aspects of solitude is that it allows us to let go of the identities we've constructed for ourselves through the influence of others. In the midst of the world's expectations, we can easily lose sight of who we truly are. We may find ourselves conforming to societal standards or living for the approval of others. But solitude strips away all of those external influences. It brings us back to the core of who we are, children of God, created in His image with a unique purpose. In solitude, we begin to rediscover our true identity, untainted by the opinions of others. We begin to see ourselves through the eyes of our Creator, which gives us the freedom to embrace who we are and the purpose we were designed for. This process of rediscovery is vital for personal transformation. When we live according to the world's standards, we often operate out of fear, insecurity, or a desire to fit in. But when we allow ourselves to spend time alone with God, we receive His love and affirmation, which removes the need for external validation. God sees us as we are imperfect but loved, broken but redeemed. It's in solitude that we receive the healing that allows us to walk in our true identity, unashamed and confident in who God has called us to be. As we become more aligned with our true selves, we can begin to transform our lives from the inside out. Solitude is also a place where our vision can become clearer. In the busyness of life, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture. We can get so focused on the tasks at hand, the people around us, and the immediate demands of life that we forget about the greater purpose God has for us. But in solitude, we are given the space to step back, reflect, and regain perspective. It is in these quiet moments that we can hear God's voice more clearly, guiding us toward the vision He has for our lives. We begin to understand more fully what He has called us to do and where He is leading us. Our vision becomes sharper, our path more defined, and we move forward with greater clarity and purpose. This time of transformation also equips us to face the challenges that lie ahead. Life is full of obstacles. There will be struggles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But solitude strengthens us for those moments. It's in the quiet, reflective times that we are able to build resilience, renew our faith, and prepare ourselves spiritually for the road ahead. When we face challenges, we can look back on the times of solitude when God shaped and strengthened us, knowing that we are ready for whatever comes next. True transformation is not always immediate. It's a process that takes time, and it often requires multiple seasons of solitude for God to continue His work in us. Just like a potter shaping clay, God slowly molds us, carefully removing imperfections, refining our character, and preparing us for the work He has for us. Each season of solitude is a step forward in our transformation, a time when God is doing something profound in our hearts and minds. When we embrace solitude, we open ourselves up to the process of becoming who we are meant to be. It is in these moments alone, when we are still before God, that we experience transformation. We are changed, not by external circumstances, but by the power of God working within us. Solitude is where we are made whole, restored, and prepared to live out the purpose that God has designed for us. So when you find yourself in solitude, embrace it. Don't see it as a time of isolation or loneliness, but as a sacred moment of transformation. It is in those quiet spaces that God is at work, reshaping you into the person you were always meant to be, ready to fulfill the calling He has placed on your life. There's a divine purpose behind every moment of solitude, especially when we understand that it's not merely about being alone. It's about growing closer to God and becoming more attuned to His will for our lives. Many times, people avoid solitude because they think it means missing out on the company of others or becoming disconnected from the world. But the truth is, solitude offers us the unique opportunity to cultivate a deeper relationship with God. It's in those quiet moments that we are able to listen to His voice without distraction, to understand His will, and to receive His guidance for the next steps in our lives. When we withdraw from the noise, the pressure, and the distractions of the world, we create a sacred space where God can speak directly into our hearts. The world constantly bombards us with messages about what we should do, who we should be, and where we should go. These external influences can cloud our judgment, distort our understanding of our purpose, and cause confusion. But in solitude, we set aside these distractions and allow ourselves to be fully present with God. It is in this space that we can hear His voice clearly, receiving guidance that is in line with His purpose for us. God often speaks to us when we are alone, because it's then that we are most vulnerable and most open to His leading. In solitude, we shed the facades we wear for the world. We stop pretending to be something we are not and start allowing God to reveal our true selves. It's in this moment of rawness that God can begin to work in us, reshaping our hearts, clearing our minds, and redirecting our steps. We become more aligned with His plans and purposes for our lives, and the clarity we receive in those moments shapes the decisions we make when we return to the world. In addition to the guidance we receive in solitude, it's also a time to reflect on the journey we've walked so far. When we're surrounded by people and caught up in the busyness of life, we often forget to stop and evaluate how far we've come. Solitude gives us the opportunity to pause, reflect on God's faithfulness, and assess the lessons that He has been teaching us. We can look back on the challenges we've faced, the victories we've won, and the ways in which God has carried us through. This reflection helps us see the bigger picture, how everything is working together for our good and His glory, and it strengthens our faith in His ongoing work in our lives. This process of reflection in solitude also helps us to discern the direction God is leading us. Many times we can feel confused or uncertain about the future because there are so many choices and paths before us. But when we allow ourselves time alone with God, we gain the clarity needed to understand His will. It's in these quiet moments that we are able to strip away the distractions and truly listen to the voice of God guiding us toward our purpose. We begin to understand that God's plan is not just about where we end up, but about the process and the journey itself. It's about learning to trust Him with each step, knowing that His way is always better than our own. Solitude also allows us to recalibrate our priorities and to realign ourselves with God's values. In the midst of life's demands, it's easy to lose focus on what truly matters. We can get caught up in the pursuit of success, approval, or the opinions of others. But solitude is the perfect opportunity to step back and ask ourselves what is truly important. When we are quiet before God, we can begin to see how our priorities may have shifted or become misaligned. It is in those moments that God can redirect our hearts, refocus our minds, and help us restore our priorities to reflect His will. Solitude helps us recalibrate, ensuring that we are living according to His purpose and not our own ambitions or desires. Moreover, solitude provides us with the strength to carry out the mission God has given us. Life can be draining, whether it's the challenges of work, family, or ministry. The demands of life can leave us feeling exhausted and depleted. But when we spend time in solitude, we are able to recharge spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. It is in the presence of God that we are replenished, renewed, and restored. Just as Jesus withdrew to pray and be refilled before continuing His work, we too need those moments alone with God to be strengthened for the tasks ahead. Without solitude, we can quickly burn out, but with it, we are equipped to continue walking in the purpose God has given us. In solitude, God also deals with the deep issues of our hearts. Often we carry burdens that we may not even be fully aware of, wounds from the past, hidden insecurities, or unresolved emotions. When we are alone with God, these issues surface and we can allow God to heal them. Solitude becomes a place of inner healing where God can address the things that need attention. It's an opportunity to bring our struggles, our fears, and our pain before Him, knowing that He is the one who can heal, restore, and transform us from the inside out. It's important to understand that solitude doesn't mean isolation. It's not about withdrawing from relationships or cutting ourselves off from the world entirely. Instead, it's about intentionally creating space for God to speak, to heal, and to guide. It's about ensuring that our hearts are aligned with His will, our minds are focused on His truth, and our actions reflect His love. In solitude, we draw near to God, and in doing so, we are better equipped to engage with the world around us in a way that is aligned with His purpose for our lives. So when God calls you into solitude, don't resist it. Embrace the stillness, knowing that it's in those moments that He is doing something profound in your life. He is drawing you closer to Himself, guiding you, healing you, and preparing you for the work He has called you to do. In solitude, you gain the clarity, the strength, and the purpose you need to fulfill your divine calling. Solitude is not just an absence of noise or people, it's an invitation into a deeper, more intimate relationship with God. It is in those quiet moments, when everything else falls away, that we are invited to meet God in the rawness of our hearts. These moments of solitude are not for the faint of heart. They are where we shed the superficial, the distractions, and the facade we so often put on to face the world. In solitude, we become vulnerable before God, truly transparent. It's when we are alone with Him that we allow ourselves to be fully honest without fear of judgment or expectation from others. One of the most powerful aspects of solitude is the opportunity it gives us to confront the parts of ourselves that we tend to hide from the world. In the busyness of life, we can easily avoid dealing with the deeper issues within us. Whether it's unresolved pain, fear, guilt, or insecurities, the noise and distractions of life allow us to push these things aside. But when we find ourselves alone, we can no longer ignore them. It's in the stillness that we begin to face the truth about our hearts. It's in these moments that God can begin to work in us, to heal the wounds we've been avoiding, and to transform the areas of our lives that need attention. Without solitude, these deep-rooted issues remain hidden, and we can't fully experience the healing and freedom God has for us. Solitude also provides the space for deep self-reflection and self-awareness. Often we are so caught up in the hustle of life and our roles and responsibilities that we lose sight of who we truly are. We begin to define ourselves by what we do, what we accomplish, or how others see us. But solitude helps us peel away those layers and reconnect with the true essence of who we are as children of God. It is here in the quiet that we rediscover our identity, not based on the world's standards, but based on how God sees us. When we're alone with Him, we can clearly hear His voice telling us who we are, what we were created for, and what He desires for us. It is in solitude that our true identity is revealed, and we are reminded that we are loved, accepted, and valued, regardless of our circumstances or achievements. This space of solitude also allows us to realign our hearts with God's will. In the rush of life, it's easy to get distracted by our own ambitions, desires, and plans. We begin to move forward with our own ideas of success, forgetting to consult God along the way. Solitude provides us with the opportunity to step back and ask God, what do you want from me? What is your will for my life? When we take the time to listen in the quiet moments, we receive direction and clarity. God speaks to us, not through the noise of the world, but in the stillness of our hearts. We find that when we align our desires with His, our lives begin to flow with a sense of purpose and meaning that surpasses anything we could have planned on our own. It is in solitude that we are recalibrated, reminded of our true calling, and empowered to walk in the path that God has set before us. Solitude also deepens our ability to experience God's presence. When we spend time alone with God, we invite Him to fill the space in our hearts that is often crowded with distractions. In the quiet moments, we are able to experience His nearness in ways that are difficult to comprehend when we are surrounded by the noise of daily life. There is something profoundly intimate about being alone with God. In solitude, we find peace, rest, and reassurance. We feel His love in a deeper way, knowing that we are not alone. This connection is more than just intellectual knowledge. It's a deep, soul-level experience that strengthens our relationship with God. The more time we spend in solitude, the more we come to understand His heart, His love for us, and His faithfulness. Solitude also allows us to be spiritually nourished. Just as we need food to sustain our physical bodies, our souls need nourishment as well. In solitude, we have the opportunity to meditate on Scripture, to pray, and to reflect on God's goodness. We are able to slow down enough to hear His voice, to receive His comfort, and to be filled with His strength. The busyness of life often pulls us in so many different directions that we neglect our spiritual well-being. We focus on what we can see and touch, forgetting the deep need for spiritual nourishment. But solitude offers us the time and space to focus solely on our relationship with God, allowing Him to fill us with His peace and power. Just as a plant needs time alone in the soil to grow, we need solitude to grow spiritually. Without it, we become dry and depleted, but in solitude, we are replenished. Moreover, solitude is where we can cultivate a deeper sense of gratitude. When we step away from the constant noise of the world and sit in God's presence, we begin to notice His faithfulness in ways we may have missed. We begin to appreciate the small blessings in our lives, the moments of peace, the beauty of creation, the love of family and friends. In solitude, we are given the space to reflect on all the ways God has been good to us. and our hearts are filled with thankfulness. It is often in these moments of quiet reflection that we find the true joy of life, not in external circumstances, but in the deep connection we have with our Creator. Solitude brings us back to the essence of what matters most and helps us to see our lives from a perspective of gratitude. The gift of solitude is not just about taking a break or escaping from the demands of life. It's about creating a sacred space for God to work in our hearts, to speak to us, and to reveal His will. It's in solitude that we grow spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. It's where we are transformed, healed, and aligned with God's purpose for our lives. Far from being a time of isolation or loneliness, solitude is a gift that draws us closer to God and allows us to experience His presence and love in deeper, more meaningful ways. So, when you find yourself in solitude, embrace it. Don't see it as time lost or time wasted. See it as the sacred opportunity it is, a chance to grow, to hear from God, and to be transformed. In solitude, you will find the strength, peace, and direction you need to walk out the calling God has placed on your life. In conclusion, remember that solitude is not a time of abandonment or loneliness, but rather a divine invitation to step away from the noise of the world and into the presence of God. It is in the quiet moments that we find healing, clarity, purpose, and strength. Through solitude, God shapes us, refines us, and realigns our hearts with His will. So embrace these moments of stillness as sacred opportunities for growth and transformation. As you walk through life, may you continue to seek those quiet spaces, allowing God to work within you and guide your steps. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on this powerful truth. I wish you all the best as you step into this journey of solitude and transformation. May you find peace, strength, and purpose in the quiet moments ahead. Good luck and thank you.